I'm Judy Perlman, your host, and I'm really excited as we're launching this show and trying new things. Today, as you see, we have two guests. Yay! Ellen Shachter and Lydia Lopez work at the Office of Housing Stability for the City of Somerville. And we're talking about some pretty serious stuff today, which is if you look outside of the CCTV studio or basically anywhere that you drive around in Cambridge or Somerville, you see a vast development boom. Good news, right? Tax revenues, all kinds of great stuff for a community. And yet, that creates a lot of challenges for a community. And that's what these folks are working to bring their best game to try to figure out how to stabilize housing for people who've lived in the city for a long time. So without any further ado, I'm going to actually, Ellen, why don't you sort of frame up the whole
Sure, I'd love to do that.
Frame up
Thank
the whole
you.
thing for us. Great.
So again, I would just say my name is Ellen Shachter and I'm the director of the Somerville Office of Housing Stability, although I did also work for almost 30 years at Cambridge and Somerville Legal Services, so have worked also within the Cambridge community. And I think you really summed up the core of the issue well, that at the same time that our cities are thriving, there's a whole lot of people for whom the environment has really become a crisis. And I don't know if now's a good time, but I did want to give you some numbers, a little bit about displacement.
Sure.
What I'm seeing now. Is now a good time to do?
Can you actually just define what you mean when you say displacement?
Thank you. You're going to hear a lot of talk around the country about anti-displacement, and as people may or may not know, the demographics of our population as a whole have really changed. So people are moving back into the urban cores. They're moving back into places where there is access to good jobs, where there's access to public transportation. And that impact of people wanting to come back in the city means that some of our families are being priced out of the market as there's more demand. So displacement as we see it is seen in rising rents, in rising home values, in displacement of traditional populations that have been in the community. And it's really gotten to a point in the greater Boston area where every city and town that's dealing with this issues is beginning to see this as one of the central crises that it faces as municipalities.
Yeah. I would venture to say that the whole condo conversion movement was something that was seen as a great stabilizer. Oh, this is going to be a great solution, and yet it really forced so many people out of their options. So yes, so lay some numbers on us.
Sure, I will. So just to give you some of the numbers that are coming out of Somerville for now, because I think this is really important, is that typical rents for a two-bedroom apartment at this point are about $2,491 for a two-bedroom. What that essentially means is that a family has to have about $99,000 in annual income, in order to be able to comfortably afford that rent and the cost of utilities. So because so many of our families don't make anywhere near that figure of $99,000, what that essentially means are, as more and more units turn over and landlords are more frequently looking at what can I get on the market to set rents for existing apartments, that a lot of families are being faced with displacement. The demand for affordable housing has escalated tremendously, and I just want to give you a few numbers quickly. In Somerville, for example, the Somerville Housing Authority has about 609 families on its elderly disabled wait list, which means for seniors and folks with disabilities, and they place about 35 families a year in those units. So that means it would take about 17 years just for existing families, Somerville families, that are already on that list to get housed. Yeah, and we see the same thing with family-sized units, and in some way, that crisis is more acute because the affordability of larger-sized units is so difficult to contend with. But again, we estimate, based on the figures on the wait lists, that it would be about 22 years for existing families on the federal elderly disabled wait list to get housed. So this is the situation that we're facing: a really limited supply of affordable housing with wait lists closed or insurmountable in terms of time, limited resources, and a lot of folks, particularly vulnerable folks, immigrant families, seniors, people who are low and moderate income, but including all tenants are at risk of involuntary displacement.
Yeah. Well, it's a grim picture that you're painting for us, and we're going to talk through our time today about sort of working at the policy level and also working at the human level. And I think Lydia is somebody. Is it really true that you grew up? You came here from El Salvador and you've lived in Somerville your whole life?
Not my whole life, but yes, I came
much,
here.
yeah.
I came here, and my first, home away from home was Somerville. I came to the Edgerly School, as it was known back then, and then to the East Somerville Community School. But I graduated from a nearby city called Everett, so just across the river.
Cool. Well, Lydia, you're working in the trenches, so to speak. Why don't you put us in the picture a little bit of some of the folks that you work with and some of the stories that you hear? That'd be great.
Sure. Some of the communities that we see come through our office doors a lot is elders, and when I mean elders, I mean 60 plus, but we have seen folks coming in, very, very old age, like 80 or more, who have lived through, multiple building sales, and that are really looking at, a place that's sort of live for their end of life. And so with a lot of those vulnerable communities, I'll just give you one story of this elderly woman, 80-year-old, tenant of Somerville for almost 50 years, have lived through at least 2 building sales, and the landlord is selling the house, unfortunately. And, he would roughly give a client of this age 5 months for housing, which one would think is very generous time. But as Ellen clearly painted a picture for us, that's not adequate time at all. And so one of the strategies we use for clients is finding out if they're eligible for something called emergency preference. And what that is certain criteria that deem someone as an emergency based on how they were displaced. And so one of the most common criteria that we use in office or that we see is either a no-fault eviction, which means that someone was taken to court based on no fault, which means that the landlord just wanted their unit back. There was no lease violation, there was no non-payment of rent. They really just are asking for their unit back, or especially with older folks, medical emergency.
So that's a story of one person. Can you tell us how she's faring now?
Yeah, well, thankfully we managed to establish upon pending approval for medical emergency, which puts her 13 out of the almost 600, which you would say, oh, those are really good odds, but we really can't control how fast the units turn around, especially in a year. But I would also really emphasize that for a lot of landlords, having just a number, some sort of idea of when exactly a tenant will be out is a very good reassure to the landlord that there is work being done. It's just not moving, as quickly as the market was beforehand.
Right.
And I just wanted to add one thing that I think the story Lydia tells really shows that it is absolutely critical that families fully understand what it is that can help them get housing quickly. And that's really where our office comes in, right? Our office is there to make absolutely sure, with the myriad of programs that are out there, that tenants understand what the criteria are, then that our staff are helping to see if there's any way that we can get them towards the top of the list. That doesn't change the lack of affordable housing, but it may mean for that family the difference between homelessness and remaining housed.
Right, and we were just talking a little bit before the show about the complexity of navigating through these systems, and we swim in these waters, and it's confusing to us sometimes. And imagine being all freaked out because you're housing and you don't know where to turn. So I think it's actually pretty visionary of the city to have established a municipal, stake in the ground. Come to City Hall, we're going to help you get started on something to maintain your housing.
And I think just picking up on that, Judy, a couple of years ago, as more and more candidates, there were city council elections, there was presidential election. At the doors in Somerville, we candidates were finding that the single issue that people were articulating they were most concerned about were housing prices and affordability. So people were hearing it over and over again. And I do want to credit Mayor Curtatone. I think he heard that loud and clear, and that he has really made a commitment to putting financial resources and other resources on the table to say, the federal government's getting out of the business of affordable housing. The state has lessened resources over time, although some are rebuilding. And the city, not that we're going to let anyone off the hook, because that's really critical, but that the city's really going to do its part. New tax dollars are coming in as a result of gentrification. We're seeing more money to do more things, and I want to, thank the mayor and the city council for saying this is going to be a top priority for resources that are coming into Somerville.
That's great. That's great. So this is Meet the Problem Solvers. Ellen Shachter, Lydia Lopez from the Office of Housing Stability in Somerville are here with me today. I'm Judy Perlman. As you know, I've sort of come from out of the housing world, and I've worked both on the direct service plane and also at the policy level. You know what? I also want to I want you guys to tell me about some of the innovative structures and strategies that you have put in place.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that really sort of initiated me to, join OHS was the innovative approach and the collaborative approach. I mean, we really try to leverage our resources as much as possible in order to really position, the case or the client that comes in to a level of success and sustainability. We don't look at, a short-term bandage solution. We look at how is this person's plan with housing sustainable in the long term? And that's really our end goal, and that's what our success looks like. And so a little bit of collaboration, we leverage non-city services available to us in Somerville, as well as city agencies that, have come about, this very collaborative city environment, some like Somerviva, that is known as the Office of Immigrant Affairs, that have, bilingual staff that really, help us, especially reach very vulnerable communities, as well as some folks like the Council on Aging that, specifically target seniors. And the other thing too that I want to emphasize is the fact that our training comes from housing and public interest attorneys, and right now we're really seeing that all the affordable housing stock that is being put on the market comes from these city initiatives, which are very policy dense. And so that really gives us the tools as case managers, that really gives the case managers the tool to really look at a case and then position them, for success or for these housing opportunities.
I think I understand. When you say policy dense, help me understand what you mean there.
Well, what I mean when I say that is, you look at a piece of paper and it's in English and you can understand
every single word, but
but maybe it doesn't really read. And so think about maybe going to a government office, or a school enrollment, or any sort of institutional form, and really read about how everything has to be spelled out for you. Someone had to do that work, and really with these policy initiatives right now, the gatekeepers are the attorneys and the folks who know how to really digest and comprehend what is being asked, or what the criteria is, or the eligibility is, or what is the purpose of this affordable housing program.
And so in a way, not only are you helping people navigate through them, but you're even translators, sometimes actually linguistically, and in other ways just like, okay, that's pretty crazy, those 3 pages, let's walk through it, or let me just tell you what you really need to know.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think when we talked about doing the show, you also talked about some very fruitful collaborations that you have with faith communities, which is, I mean, when you can't manage things just with public money, you have to look to your partners, and it's really wonderful that you have
Do you want to say something
this.
about that, about what we've seen about EA Shelter?
I mean, some things, to put it in layman's terms, EA Shelter, Massachusetts is the only state in the country that, as a state, they offer shelter for families, and that system is through DHCD. and really the way that someone kind of comes in through that system, the system is called emergency assistance, or EA for short. And basically, if you're over income or if you don't fit these very narrow criterias of how you were displaced, then you're really not eligible to receive shelter services. So we see a lot of families that maybe voluntarily leave a housing unit or apartment or get illegally evicted, which means that there were no court proceedings, or just by the very fact that they're over income. And so for those families, we've really partnered with especially sanctuary city networks to see where both of our ideals really intersect, and see how we can both leverage those resources together.
Great.
Yeah,
that is very cool. Okay.
Yeah, and then I guess I'd want to talk about the other piece of the work that we do a little bit. So when I first decided to come to the Office of Housing Stability, it was really, really important to me that there be a vision that looked not only at helping individuals that were immediately facing displacement, but really looking at what possible tools exist out there that we can use to really change both change the availability of affordable housing and also to change some of the landscape so that tenants are better able to remain in their homes, to really look at anti-displacement initiatives. So one of the first things that I did was to develop a business plan after, 30 to 40 different meetings, really getting the lay of the land. And I'd already been there for 30 years working in Somerville, so knew it pretty well, but really got in touch with a whole lot of stakeholders to really figure out what I wanted the priorities of the office to be. And one of the things that was clear to me was that while I wanted this to be municipally run and led, we have resources, we have, a lot of expertise, I also wanted this to be empowering for nonprofits in the community to be able to expand what they are able to do, because not everything should come from the city or the city of Somerville. So the first things that I determined were that I really felt like we needed to contract for services in three areas. To contract for services for legal services, because right now it is about 8% of all tenants are represented in eviction cases, and in Cambridge and Somerville about 90% of landlords are represented. Statewide, that is a little lower, it's at 70, but there's a huge imbalance of power that's happening in the courthouse every week when people are facing evictions. So really enabling more tenants to be able to have legal representation is very important to outcomes and to empowerment. A second thing was that it became very clear to me that if we were going to be able to work not only on a one-by-one basis, but building-wide, where there are some buildings that were at risk of condo conversion, huge rent increases, sales, that we really needed to have some capacity for tenant education and tenant organizing that wasn't being done by the city, but that we could collaborate with folks. So we had a team of an organizer, legal representation, and the city offering city services as the best chance of being able to really prevent displacement as we see it unfolding. So one of those things was around services, and I wanted to make sure we were getting the right ones in place with the right players. And then the second piece, and of course absolutely critical piece, was really to look at the programs and policies that we had both in the state and at the municipal level, because I think those are the areas where we can have the most impact, is in the state and municipal level. Federal organizing is important, but probably not as feasible for my small office to really have an impact on. And so, for example, some of the three things I always say, so for anti-displacement, I believe that there's a stool for stability. This is what I say, that there's three parts of that, three components. And if you don't have one of those legs of the stool's probably going to fall down and you're not going to be able to have a chair for folks to sit on. So those three one is increasing the supply of affordable housing. So that means funding and it means regulatory issues. 2, better targeting the existing housing resources that we have towards those at imminent risk of displacement. And then 3rd is enhancing tenants' rights so that tenants have a better opportunity to remain in the homes that they're in and not become displaced in the first place. So for myself, each time I look at what are the initiatives that we should do, I look at those 3 prongs and I say, does this in policy that I want to work on really advance one or more of those elements?
So I just want to, for my own brain, I want to restate those. The 3 then, well, the first one was increasing the supply.
Increasing the funding
protecting
for and supply
of affordable housing. The second one being
better targeting existing housing resources towards those at imminent risk of displacement, and I can say a little bit more about what I mean about that. And then the third is enhancing tenants' rights and tenants' access to resources to enable them to remain in their homes.
I don't know, it went by very quickly before when Ellen said it, but I think it's really important to understand what she was saying, which is that fewer than 8% of tenants have legal representation, where in Cambridge and Somerville, upwards of 90% of landlords have legal representation.
That's
so
correct.
At court, we have this unbelievable mismatch of power, impact, knowledge.
And I think that's a really good segue into our bumper stickers that Lydia and I have on today, which says support the right to counsel. And I think I wanted to, so one of the main initiatives that our office is working on is actually an initiative at the State House, which would essentially have us create a new state law that would entitle tenants facing eviction that are under a certain income, so vulnerable tenants, would have a right to an attorney in an eviction case the same way that they do when they're charged with a criminal action. And you know, over the many years I've done this work, sometimes the consequences of losing your home are more far-reaching than the consequences of being found guilty of a criminal offense, like a first-time offense, an assault and battery, a drug issue. So we really need to look at those civil penalties and make sure that we're empowering tenants in the same way that we are for those criminal cases.
So this is Meet the Problem Solvers. I'm Judy Perlman. Today we're digging in with Ellen Shachter, the Director of the Office of Housing Stability for the City of Somerville, and Lydia Lopez, Case Manager for the Office of Housing Stability. And I totally lost my train of thought that I was going to just, the right to counsel. Right, I can tell you after all my work in homelessness, you're absolutely right, Ellen. The mark against you, if you have an eviction, fault or no fault, it really doesn't matter. No one is going to go back and untangle what happened in that situation and what it's just you cannot get into housing again.
And that, you know, that brings me to my second issue. So we have several priorities that the mayor and we have collaboratively established with the mayor, one of which is working on the statewide bills for right to counsel. And I did just want to note that New York City, San Francisco, and Newark all currently have right to counsel in eviction cases. So while this is a new concept, it is being tried and true. The effect of it is being measured, where it is being implemented, so we're really excited about that. But the second thing that relates to what you were talking about is something called the Homes Act, which is also a piece of state legislation, which would allow for cases where there is no finding of fault by a judge in an eviction case to be sealed for that exact reason that you were talking about. Right now, all of the information about evictions are online without any discrimination of, is this the right Maria Lopez in the first place that I'm looking at? Was this a fault case, or was this because I'm converting to condos? What was the origin? And there are so many strikes against our clients as it is, who are those that are most senior, most frail, low and moderate income, that the last thing they need is another strike against them from a public system where they may have done absolutely nothing wrong.
It's interesting because what you're also talking about is the very challenging complexity of changing these laws. Because you're really talking about creating a change for the city of Somerville by going to the State House and getting permission to have, what's it called, home rule?
So yeah, and I think that's a really important thing to explain, is that our Constitution sets out the parameters of what municipalities can do versus what a state can do. And in most cases that involve landlord-tenant law, we really do need permission from the state to make significant changes. Also, what that really means is whether or not we all in Cambridge and Somerville are in agreement about what a policy should be, we really have to convince people statewide that it's something that they should at least allow the municipalities to do. So that really creates the need for more organizing on a statewide basis around issues.
Which brings us to where we usually end up this show asking, so, okay, we just learned a lot. I mean, we learned a lot. And what does it mean for us? If we're trying to be thoughtful, because good neighbors, trying to make an impact. What is it that we can be doing as people who live in Massachusetts and are concerned about these things? So let it rip. Tell us what we can do.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think one of the things that I really learned from the office is that we really see folks, non-tenants, if you will, as collaborators in this space, especially landlords. And we see this as a win-win situation, and a situation where, the benefits of one are the benefits of many. And we really look to landlords and to really, ask them to think about the impact of what it is to be a good neighbor, right? And what it is, to work collaboratively, not maybe with the city, but with tenants, and in the broader context with, housing displacement specifically.
Yeah.
So again, we really need every single person in the community to be a part of the solution. And I honestly believe that most people, landlords, tenants, others, if you ask them if they want their neighbors and their tenants to be displaced, the answer is no. So we really need to be thinking of creative solutions outside the box. And there's many more I could tell you about. Not sure if we have time. But so I would say get involved with your housing organizations. Many cities and towns have local grassroots initiatives that are working on housing issues. In Somerville, reach out to the Office of Housing Stability. Continue to ask these questions. Vocalize when there's public debates, when there's things going on. Please just put your voice out there as saying it is really important that housing ultimately is a human right and not something that is only decided by the speculative market. We need to make sure that people can thrive by having safe, affordable homes.
And then just one more thing I'll add. If someone is interested, we do have resources on our website if they want to learn a little bit more about the policy initiatives that our office has really collaborating with, or any anti-displacement news just all around Massachusetts or the country. The URL is somervillema.gov/OHS.
Okay, so and now here's our little pitch. We will put that up on our Facebook page. If folks who are watching this are enjoying this show, we hope that you'll come and visit the Facebook page. It's called Meet the Problem Solvers. Okay, it's not creative, but it sort of does make sense. And I know these guys have some amazing resources. If you're in your own learning curve, and we're all in a learning curve on things about housing and stability and displacement, visit their website. You can get there from our Facebook, and